It was a twist no one saw coming. Labor's hate speech laws have blown up the coalition.
I understand if you do the crime, you have to take the time. And if it is so requested, I will be stepping down from Shadow Cabinet.
It started with 3 senior Nationals resigning from the opposition frontbench after defying Shadow Cabinet and voting against the government's hate speech laws.
I'm very aware of the conventions of Parliament.
Are you daring Sussan Ley to sack you?
Then after a late-night emergency meeting, the entire Nationals frontbench followed suit, resigning their positions in solidarity. I'm Nicole Johnston, and you're listening to 7am. Today, Press Gallery journalist Karen Middleton on how Labor got their laws passed, imploding the coalition along the way. It's Thursday, January 22. Karen, thanks for joining me after an extraordinary 48 hours. We've seen a deepening public split in the coalition, with the Nationals breaking rank with their Liberal partners over Albanese's hate crime laws, leading to resignations. How did this all play out?
Well, we saw the Parliament recalled, and on Sunday night the Shadow Ministry met and determined a position. That was the members of the Shadow Cabinet who were both Liberals and Nationals. They got an agreed position on the hate crimes dimensions. The Nationals were going their own way on firearms laws, but they were all supposed to vote the same way on hate crimes. However, when it got into the Parliament, that's not what happened.
And unfortunately, despite the many positive elements of this legislation, the government has not been able to convince my party room, the National Party, that adequate safeguards are in place for the proposed hate crimes.
And in fact, Sussan Ley has made the point in the statement she issued that there were 3 different positions from the Nationals across the 2 houses of Parliament. One voted for it, some voted no, and some abstained. So already we started to see things splintering. But where it got really untidy for the Nationals is that while they are allowed to cross the floor if they are backbenchers within the coalition, unlike in Labor where they would be expelled for crossing the floor, if you are a frontbencher, you cannot do that. You must adhere to the position that the Shadow Cabinet has adopted. So we saw 3 members of the Nationals in the Senate who were frontbenchers decide to vote in opposition to their own party's position, and they are the ones who've now had to resign. They will be out of the Shadow Cabinet. They will still serve in other positions, parliamentary committee positions and the like, and they'll still obviously be in the Senate, but they will no longer be frontbenchers as a result of that decision. They say they acted on their conscience, that they felt they couldn't endorse the position that had been agreed, even though Sussan Ley says that these issues weren't especially raised during the Shadow Cabinet meeting, and they've taken that course.
As you said, when they crossed the floor, they knew they were breaking the rules. But what was it specifically that they felt that this was worth quitting over?
Well, that's interesting. It's not entirely clear. One of the things they have said is that they tried to amend the legislation to send it off to a committee to get longer scrutiny of it, and that was rejected. So that's the thing that they've pointed to most directly, but that doesn't seem to be all of it. And of course, we know the Nationals are under pressure from One Nation. They've lost Barnaby Joyce, their former leader, former Deputy Prime Minister, to One Nation. One Nation is polling very strongly. And so I think there are concerns within the Nationals that they want to distinguish themselves from the Liberal Party and not lose ground on the Conservative side to another party.
And then yesterday, David Littleproud wrote to Sussan Ley, warning that if she let the Nats walk, that the rest would go, which is what we've now seen. So did Ley make the right call?
Well, I don't think she had any choice, Nicole. I mean, she couldn't go against what the coalition usually demands, and that is solidarity among the Shadow Ministry. That is the rule. If she hadn't required them to resign, she would look weak, and that would destroy her leadership, and her leadership may well be destroyed now anyway as a result of this. But David Littleproud was staring her down with that letter that emerged last night, and she has, called his bluff, and they've walked out. And so we're back to where we were last year with the Nationals. It seems kind of out of the coalition, not officially yet, but you've got to think that's a matter of time.
So when all of this happened, Karen, what did you think?
Well, the word that came to mind was debacle. I mean, you know, the government has been under pressure, the Labor government, for its handling of the December 14 terrorist attack at Bondi. The coalition has forced the government's hand in making changes to its legislation, and they've just gone and blown themselves up. And politically speaking, that seems completely idiotic, and given the government the ability to claim a victory at the end of the parliamentary sitting. So it's up to the coalition to explain how this is anything positive, because it doesn't look like that to me.
So without the Nats on the front bench, are there even enough Liberals to fill all the roles?
Well, barely. I know there have been jokes about, you know, filling a minibus and that sort of thing since the federal election, but now, I mean, it's not so much of a joke, really, is it? Yeah, there are enough, but it isn't a coalition if the Nationals aren't represented on the front bench. And late last night, Sussan Ley put out a statement saying there was no need for the Nationals to resign en masse, and that she's basically going to keep their positions open and try to hold the coalition together. She said the Liberal Party supports the coalition arrangements because they deliver the most effective political alliance for good government. And she noted that David Littleproud's letter to her didn't talk about dissolving the coalition. So she's trying to avoid that happening.
So how likely is it that Sussan Ley will keep her job after this?
I think it's very hard to see her continuing as things are, but there has to be a challenger. There has to be a challenger who can garner enough numbers in the Liberal Party, bearing in mind the Nationals don't get a vote on the Liberal Party leadership, to secure the leadership. Those who had designs on the leadership had indicated last year that they weren't ready and wanted to wait. So it's a bit hard to know how it all goes. Whether they can pull themselves back together and plough on again is anyone's guess. But things can't continue the way they are. There has to be some kind of reckoning for all of this, I think, because clearly there's unrest within the Nationals, within the Liberals, within the coalition as a whole, and that's not how you hold a government to account.
Coming up, what's actually in these laws? Karen, can you explain for us in some more detail how these new laws will work?
Well, the focus of the new laws are on a few different things. There is now a designation power for the Home Affairs Minister. He can nominate, designate, proscribe organisations that are seen to be engaging in hate speech. He can only do that if the domestic spy agency ASIO has had these groups on their radar, has gathered evidence that they have been doing these things and then made a report to the government. And now the opposition has also required that the opposition leader be consulted in that process. So there are a few changes that have been made, but there are still some concerns about how that prescription regime might work, and some fears that it could be used in future by a minister with a grudge against various organisations for reasons other than just the hate speech provision. So there's some controversy still about that. There are aggravated offences for preachers, so people who hold leadership positions within religious organisations. If they are found to be engaging in hate speech, then the penalty for them is greater than for others. There are some aggravated provisions if you are seen to be influencing young people as well. There are provisions about migration, making it easier to deport foreign citizens who engage in hate speech, and the coalition pushed hard on aspects of that. And the maximum penalties for these offences range from around about 7 years up to as many as 15 years imprisonment. So there are a whole lot of different elements to that hate crimes legislation that passed.
Karen, as you mentioned, the laws dramatically changed the way that hate groups are prescribed in Australia, and the minister now has more power over that process. So what could that mean in practice?
They've put a caveat in there, or a safeguard in there, that organisations could only be subject to this ministerial designation if they're already on ASIO's radar. So if the domestic spy agency has already been investigating them, has documented their activities and has evidence that they are engaging in hate speech to a concerning degree, that report would have to go to the minister first before the minister could consider designating them. The critics of that say, but that is still a secret process, and they are concerned at the lack of review capability, so that if you're in an organisation that's been designated like that, you basically have no means of reviewing it and you won't necessarily be able to see the evidence provided against your organisation. So those are the sorts of arguments that are being made about whether those safeguards that have been built in are enough, or whether there needs to be another provision to stop, say, some future rogue minister for using this measure to take action against a political organisation or some organisation with whom that minister has a problem.
We are hearing some concern that under the legislation, groups that criticise Israel or accuse it of genocide in Gaza, that they could be caught up in these laws. What's your assessment of how these types of groups could fare under these laws?
Well, these are the kinds of difficulties that we face when we're legislating in this domain, and the Greens have certainly raised concerns. The Greens refused to support the hate speech bill in the end because of that.
We will not be party to a legislation which divides communities and people along religion, which can be used to shut down political discourse and the right to protest, and which scapegoats migrants.
They fear that it will criminalise the legitimate protest against foreign governments, against the activities of foreign governments or human rights abuses, either in Australia or abroad. So the government insists that legitimate protests will still be allowed, and they are some of the questions that government officials haven't really been able to answer yet. So we may well still see things play out in the courts. They were also concerned that these laws are restricted to offences involving race and ethnicity and not religion more broadly, not sexuality, not disability. They said that they were too narrow and that other people would be left exposed. Muslims, for example, people of other faiths. So they wanted them to be broader than that. And a number of the independents also opposed the legislation for some similar reasons and because of the short time that was given to analyse the bill.
Karen, more broadly, today is a day of national mourning for the Bondi attack, and the response to the massacre has divided the community. So can you see these laws going any way to healing that?
Well, we have to hope that they do. I think having the day of national mourning is designed to bring people back to the grief about the events and to perhaps take the focus away from the politics. And I think it's also designed as a mechanism to try and bring people together again when there has been so much argument and divide in the parliament over the past few days on what measures should go forward and what measures shouldn't, to bring us back down to basics, that we are a country all together trying to move forward. And I know the Prime Minister continually emphasises unity, and I think the day of national mourning is not only designed as an acknowledgement of the terrible suffering and the appalling events that should never have happened, but of trying to unite Australia in a determination that they don't happen again and that Australians can find a way to come together.
Karen, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thanks, Nicole.
Also in the news, Queensland Premier David Crisafulli has confirmed the state won't back the federal gun buyback scheme. The Prime Minister announced his intention to tighten gun laws after the Bondi massacre on the 14th of December, including stricter licensing rules and a national buyback scheme. Premier Crisafulli says a gun buyback won't keep guns out of the hands of criminals and terrorists, saying he will introduce new state legislation when Queensland Parliament returns in February. Queensland has the second highest rate of gun ownership in the country. And Canada's Prime Minister says the country remains strongly opposed to any tariffs announced by Donald Trump, as the US President vows to take control of Greenland. Addressing leaders in Davos for the World Economic Forum, Mark Carney urged middle powers like Australia to come together in response to the fragmentation of what he called the old order. Mr. Carney has vowed to support affected NATO allies in pushing back on Mr. Trump's proposed annexation of Greenland, amid media reports that Canada is considering sending troops to Greenland for military exercises in the region. I'm Nicole Johnston. This is 7am. Catch you later.